Welcome to the final FPL team selection of the season as we delve into Game Week 38 and my transfer plans. I use both free transfers heading into Double Gameweek 37 to facilitate the bench boost, so now I only have one free transfer. I am open to taking a hit, but I'll discuss my transfer plans in this video and podcast, and also my Game Week 37 performance after all of the games have been completed by the Wednesday. And this video and podcast is recorded on the Thursday morning, so take that into account, and I'll keep you updated in the deadline stream on Sunday. Be sure not to miss it, and there is the potential for a reaction stream on the same day, as well as UCL fantasy content for match day 13 heading into the Champions League final, and possibly Euro fantasy football content as well. Smash the like button and subscribe for new if you want to see Euro fantasy football content on this channel. Let's get this video to over 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 25,000 subscribers and beyond. Check out all the links in the description below for my Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, my Patreon, the Championships Discord server, FPL League, FPL Challenge, Drafthound, as well as Spotify and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. One of my Game Week 37 transfers was in the goalkeeper position, where I sold Edison to Onana, which on the face of it actually led to an 8-point deficit, but I made that transfer to facilitate a move for a Man City player in the outfield positions who is really in form and that I felt I had to get for Double Gameweek 37. Onana got 5 points across both games against Arsenal and Newcastle at home, despite keeping no clean sheets and also conceding 3 goals in the process. But ultimately Pickford would have been a better option, despite the fact that Everton only had a single game week at home to Sheffield United. But my other goalkeeper was Petrovic, who was really good for me back in Double Gameweek 35, but going into this week, only 3 points in a double game week. That's very underwhelming. And Reece James got a red card towards the end of that game. He will be suspended for the first 3 games going into next season. And shortly afterwards, Danny Welbeck scored to wipe out that Chelsea clean sheet. So those of Cucurella and of course myself with Petrovic are a bit disappointed FPL wise. But Petrovic has been a good goalkeeper in recent weeks, and I don't regret going for him in the first place. My defensive line was quite good in Double Gameweek 37, but Dan Burn was one of the few exceptions. He got 3 points across both games, and I never thought Newcastle would keep a clean sheet against Brighton or against Manchester United, but I'm still a bit disappointed with only 3 points. Maybe an assist would have been nice, but of course it is Dan Burn we're talking about, and Brighton actually were quite competitive in that game. I thought Newcastle would win quite comprehensively there at St James's Park, and that wasn't the case in a 1-1 draw where Veltman ruled out that clean sheet for Dan Burn and co. So it was ultimately very disappointing for those of Dubravka, who ended up starting both games in 37, but not much to show for it, although he was a better way of covering that Newcastle defence compared to Dan Burn. Trippier made his first start in a long while against Manchester United, but ultimately it was the same results and they lost 3-2 against Manchester United there at Old Trafford. But my second defender was my second transfer in Game Week 37, Gvardiol, with a 27-pointer. So my transfers ended up resulting in a 19-point game, despite the fact that Edison scored 8 more points than Onana in the end. So Gvardiol, I mean, it's huge variance there, and what more can I say about that? If I didn't buy Gvardiol, I would have been on a red arrow, possibly a small green. Ultimately, it was a game changer to buy Gvardiol, and it goes down to fine margins sometimes in FPL, and also a lot of luck, which in this case has gone in my favour. I know Gvardiol's been in great form for a couple of weeks now, also possibly since March, but for him to score a brace against Fulham and the way he took that first goal, no one expected that, but that's a defender full of confidence, and he backed out with a clean sheet away to Tottenham Hotspur, as Man City are pretty much set to win their 4th consecutive Premier League title. Now my third defender was Diogo Dalot, another disappointment in this double game week, and I never expected anything from Man United defensively, especially with all the injuries they have. No Varane, no Lisandro Martinez or Luke Shaw, and they're playing Casemiro and Johnny Evans as their centre-back partnership. But Dalot played quite well against Arsenal, in my opinion, inverting as a left-back, and he had a few decent moments, but ultimately that's 3 points for Diogo Dalot, and Onana is the best way of covering Man United defensively. I've always said that, and one of the mistakes I made on the wild card was going for Onana instead of Dalot, and also Edison instead of Gvardiol. But I looked at minutes, and in the end I was wrong about that with Gvardiol. But the amount of differences in points, is absolutely crazy, especially between the Croatian and Edison, the goalkeeper. Now, to complete this defensive line, I went for Gabriel, the only single game week defender I had. He kept the clean sheet and got a bonus point away to Manchester United at Old Trafford, and there was a great win for Arsenal, a 1-0 victory, and only their 3rd since 2006 in the Premier League at that very stadium, which is a bit of a bogey one for the Gunners. And finally, Pedro Porro, who delivered against Burnley, but in the second match against Man City, he considered a penalty towards the very end. So that's a 10-pointer. Still very good stuff from him. Mickey van der Ven outscored him just about. He also scored against Burnley. And this defensive line was pretty solid. Of course, Dalot, Byrne and Petrovic were quite disappointing. But Onana, Gvardiol, Gabriel and Porro did the job. A few surprises happened in Game Week 37, one of them being Gordon blanking in a home game, particularly against Brighton, who have really struggled for form in the last couple of months. But Gordon responded with a goal at Old Trafford, and he was a bit unlucky to be on the wrong end of a decision, which could have ultimately led to a Newcastle penalty. And that's an 8-pointer for Gordon. Very solid stuff. He is now flagged in FPL, and the latest update is provided by Anthony Gordon, who said the following after the match: "Really sore. I'm not too sure how good my ankle will be heading into that final clash with Brentford away." And Anthony Gordon was discussed in my Trans Tips video and podcast. Be sure to check that out as well. I think going from him to Elise or Eze, even possibly a Havertz if you have the funds, could really work out. As good as Gordon is, the fact that he's away from home I think does put me off, but that's now back-to-back returns in away games at Turf Moor and Old Trafford, and he blanked of course in his last game at St James's Park. So if he does start against Brentford, he can do something, and it seems like Gordon is always yellow flag but still manages to play. But that's something definitely worth keeping an eye on, and I do prefer other midfielders in Game Week 38, and I also cover this in the best free hit team video and podcast. Now moving on to better things, Phil Foden got an 11-pointer. He did very well against Fulham, and I thought, wow, I captained Foden last week against Wolves, and now he's going to outscore Haaland when I go back to Erling Haaland. But Phil Foden did the job against Fulham, but blanked against Tottenham Hotspur. He played quite well in that game, but didn't have any goals or assists to show for it. I don't think his record is particularly great against the big six clubs this season, but I'm sure he's going to rectify that going into the next campaign, and he will win the Player of the Season award. The third midfielder was Bruno Fernandes, who missed the first game against Arsenal, and for him to miss 2 games consecutively against Palace and Arsenal was very rare and surprising, but he did play against Newcastle and got an assist, and I have to say 5 points is quite low. He easily could have walked away with a 10-pointer at the very least, with a few more assists headed his way. That's over 100 key passes for the season and a fantastic campaign, at least in the last couple of months of Bruno, who started a bit slowly, but throughout the whole season he's creating chances, and he's probably Man United's best player, and by some distance as well. The fourth midfielder was Cole Palmer, who got 14 points overall, and it's a very solid return. He didn't blank in any of the games in 37. What more can we say about Cole Palmer? He's one of the best FPL assets we've seen in a very long time, particularly from Chelsea and in the midfield position. And finally, Heung-min Son, the only midfielder to blank in both matches in Game Week 37, and that chance he missed against Man City was also a title decider, but Heung-min Son's miss did cost Spurs the Champions League spot, and obviously congratulations to Aston Villa as well. And I have to say I'm very surprised by Son producing 4 points against Burnley and Man City. Earlier this season in the reverse fixtures, he actually scored 30 points against the same opposition, 20 points against Burnley and 10 against Man City. It goes to show you that football is unpredictable and it's so difficult to get every decision right. But no regrets about going for Heung-min Son in the first place. He's off form, and going into Game Week 38, he is being sold by a lot of FPL managers. But as highlighted in the Trans Tips video and podcast, don't sell Heung-min Son away to Sheffield United. Another surprise for me was the fact that Isak blanked against Brighton and Man United, and he had an illness, and that's why Eddie Howe talked about the fact that Isak wasn't fully on it against Brighton, but he played against Manchester United and he blanked there yet again. I thought those fixtures would have suited him more than an Anthony Gordon, and actually recommended Isak as an alternative captaincy option. He wasn't that high up my list. I think I did have the likes of Palmer, Son, Foden as higher up, but ultimately I'm very surprised for him to blank in both matches. I thought he'd score at least 1 goal, but once again, it goes to show you the Premier League can surprise you every single week. But the second forward was Erling Haaland, who blanked against Fulham, but then scored a brace at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to kind of get rid of that curse that Man City have had over the last couple of years. They've won twice now this season in the FA Cup and the Premier League, and those goals were crucial. There is obviously some debate about the first goal. It possibly was offside, but it wasn't even checked by VAR, and ultimately FPL owners of Erling Haaland and those that captain him won't care one bit, and it ultimately doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And the last forward was Nicholas Jackson, who produced another return, but only 7 points. And I say only because he produced 16 points against West Ham in a single game week not so long ago. But Jackson has been one of the best signings on my Game Week 35 wildcard. He produced in that double game week, he did it in Game Week 37, and in Game Week 36 he produced a massive return, his second biggest of the campaign, and Jackson has been a great acquisition on the wildcard. So that was my 50-man squad with the bench boost. It was quite a successful one. Let me now show you how many points I got overall and where I stand in terms of the rank, and also talk about the captaincy and my thought process. As I mentioned earlier, I captained Erling Haaland, which is quite a template pick, of course. Palmer was my vice, and the others I really considered were Foden, Son and Isak, in that order. I'm very surprised for two of them to have blanked across both games, but 141 points is one of my best game week scores ever, so I'm very happy with that. 2,404 points overall, and my rank is 128k. I believe I'm around 12 points away from entering the top 100k, which is my goal. It would be a great end to the season. I haven't been in the top 100k for the entire campaign, and this would be my worst ever rank no matter what happens, unless I get an absolute miracle. I very much doubt I'm going to be able to better the situation that much to prevent my worst ever rank, but in the end it's still a decent ending. I think that period between game week 4 to 9 really ruined my season, and then of course some bad captaincy calls, a bit of variance going against me and stuff like that, the usual stuff. We can discuss this potentially over the summer in an FPL kind of reaction stream or kind of a review of the entire season. I have done it before and I would be open to it, but of course UCL Fantasy and potentially Euro Fantasy Football will be headed your way on this channel, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Let me now show you my transfer plans for the final game week of the season in FPL. Just a one free transfer, and it's very likely I won't take a hit, but as mentioned at the very beginning of this video and podcast, I am open to doing so, and it wouldn't be the first time that I've taken a hit going into Game Week 38. Despite consecutive blanks in double Game Week 37, I'm opting for Petrovic over Onana in Game Week 38 as Chelsea host Bournemouth whilst Man United are away to Brighton, and I think Chelsea have been in great form overall. A bit unlucky to concede at the very end against Brighton, otherwise Petrovic would have been almost immaculate since Game Week 35 when a lot of us wildcarders bought him in, and I actually benched him against West Ham in Game Week 36 when he kept a clean sheet and started Edison in that game week. So I'm hoping for a clean sheet this time round for Chelsea so Petrovic can get me something within a single game week, and I don't think I'd start Onana despite the saves he can make, and he's made a lot of them in this Premier League season, but I ultimately trust Chelsea more than Man United at this moment in time. Chelsea have climbed to 6th in the Premier League table with a very good run since that 5-0 loss to Arsenal. I would argue that my three defenders are kind of close to a best free hit team for Game Week 38. Gabriel is at home to Everton, and I think the Toffees could cause Arsenal some problems here, but with the lack of pressure, I would argue, everyone expects Man City to win the title now, and they probably will because I don't see West Ham getting a result at the Etihad. So Arsenal might play with a bit more freedom, and they typically do very well in Game Week 38 when the pressure's off. They did it last season against Wolves, won 5-0. I think the season before that they beat Everton 5-1 actually, so it could be a repeat of that, but I still think Everton are one of the best teams defensively when you look at underlying numbers, and they've kept so many clean sheets. Pickford is second in the Golden Glove race, but of course David Raya won it a couple of weeks ago, and it should be a very interesting battle. Everton can cause problems, but I still think Arsenal have a great chance of keeping a clean sheet, at least on paper, and that's what the bookmakers will tell you as well. My second defender is Pedro Porro, and despite facing Sheffield United away, I'm not that confident of a clean sheet here for Spurs. They're away from home. They haven't kept a clean sheet in 17 games, I believe. It's an awful record. But what I do back is the attacking potential for Pedro Porro in the last game week of the season. Sheffield United concede so many chances down their flanks, and I think Porro could create a lot of chances from open play and even from set pieces, which could also be a big part of Spurs' play for this match. But I have to say Porro has been a good option for me personally since I bought him around December, and I've sold him at the right time, bought him back also when it really mattered. In Game Week 35 it was quite disappointing, but in Game Week 37 when I really wanted him and backed him to deliver, he did so against Burnley, and I think this fixture is going to be more of the same against the worst team in the Premier League. And finally, the most informed defender in FPL, Josko Gvardiol. Will he score again? Possibly. It's more likely than West Ham getting a goal, in my opinion. But You never know in football, you never know. But I have to say, Man City have a great chance of a clean sheet, of a victory. They could score 3, 4 or 5 if they wish to, but hopefully we get something of an upset, really. I'd actually prefer if Gvardiol conceded than got FPL points, but we don't always get what we want. That defensive line looks very solid. You'd argue Petrovic isn't the best goalkeeper for Gameweek 38. I think David Raya would be on paper, but these 3 defenders are very close to what you could achieve on the free hit team. The current plan is to go for 4 midfielders, starting with Cole Palmer at home to Bournemouth. He's a great captaincy contender. If you want to go a little bit different and challenge Erling Haaland and maybe chase rank, Palmer could be a decent option, but his effective ownership is always between 90 to 110% at the very least, so he's not going to be a mega differential even for the captaincy, but I think putting the armband on him does separate you from other Cole Palmer owners. My second midfielder is Analyse potentially. It's between him, Havertz and Eze to come in for either Anthony Gordon or Bruno Fernandes, but I have to say Bruno Fernandes is in great form. He returns in every single game it seems, and he has a great record against Brighton, so I might reconsider that, maybe keep Bruno Fernandes and start 5 midfielders possibly, or just go for 4 midfielders and stick with what I've had since Gameweek 35 really. But Analyse has a really high ceiling. Aston Villa have secured Champions League football for the first time since 1982, and they might play that game with, well, no pressure at all, of course. They've already secured their objective, and that could be a very open game where both Palace and Aston Villa score a lot of goals. But regardless of the game state and also what's at play, I always saw this fixture as a lot of goals for Crystal Palace because Aston Villa have tailed off in recent weeks. They concede so many chances and they've been leaking goals, and I think Analyse, Eze and Mateta could actually really punish Aston Villa, even though it would mean nothing at this stage of the season. Now, my third midfielder is Heung-min Son away to Sheffield United. He's been transferred out by so many FPL managers. I believe he's the 7th most transferred out at this point of the game week. Don't sell Heung-min Son. I know he was very disappointing in Gameweek 37, but I'd back him to do very well in Gameweek 38, and it would be typical after some of the misses we saw against Manchester City. And finally, Phil Foden at home to West Ham. This could have a massive haul written all over it, and this is also another captaincy contender to rival Erling Haaland. But we saw what happened even in Gameweek 37, where it looked very good for Phil Foden captainers. In the end, Haaland outscored him by 4 points, and in Gameweek 36, a 16-point swing, which really cost me, and potentially that was it for the top 100k. Who would have thought that Nicholas Jackson would have been an FPL hero for a lot of us when we wildcarded him in Gameweek 35? We all expected pain, and there were some frustrating moments here and there, like the disallowed goal against Aston Villa, but shortly afterwards he put that right with that goal against Tottenham. He obviously did very well against West Ham, and he hasn't looked back ever since. It's a home game against Bournemouth. I think Chelsea could score 2 or 3 here, especially with the form they're in and the confidence they've built up. In Cuckoo's back, he also scored against Brighton, and he could also be a bit of a problem for Jackson going into next season, but I could still see both of them coexisting in the same side alongside Cole Palmer, who is obviously the talismanic figure, and if he can replicate what he did this season, you never know, Chelsea could actually challenge for the top 4. It's very funny how football works and how things change very quickly. The way Chelsea are ending this season does give their fans hope for a good season coming up, but let's wait and see if they have a good summer and also if they can actually do it when the pressure's on. The second forward is Isak away to Brentford, but you could argue that with Anthony Gordon's form, he might be the one to start over Isak, who really struggled in Gameweek 37 due to the illness. I think that definitely affected him against Man United and Brighton, as Eddie Howe said in his press conference, but Isak was in great form before that, and it's just a shame he couldn't deliver in Double Gameweek 37. And in Gameweek 36, of course, he scored and assisted, but missed a penalty, so he has been quite frustrating from my personal perspective, but of course, what he's done since April is also very encouraging and also very impressive at the same time. And finally, the most template pick in the game, Erling Haaland, at home to West Ham. So many people are going to captain him, especially those that want to preserve rank and are looking to be cautious and conservative. And it might not be the best play for me personally, as I'm looking to push into the top 100k. But I honestly think Man City could win by 3, 4 or 5. And Haaland, in the form he's in, it's so difficult to back against him. So is it worth doing it? I think so in certain cases, but you always know the risk with going against the Norwegian robot. I think I'm going to go for him as the captain, but let me show you my vice and also the bench, how it's ordered going into Gameweek 38. There are some tight calls to make Even the goalkeeper could be classed as one of them, Petrovic or Onana, but I'm looking at Gordon or Bruno Fernandes. Who do I sell? And if I keep them, do I end up benching them and starting Isak, Jackson and Haaland as a front three? In terms of the midfielder transfer, Elise, Eze, Havertz, or maybe somebody else entirely. Those are the 50-50 calls I have to make and finalise on, and over the next couple of days I'll give it more thought and you'll see my final transfer and team for Gameweek 38 during the deadline stream on Sunday. And in terms of the captaincy, I hinted at it just a few minutes ago. Erling Haaland is my current pick with Palmer as the vice, so no changes from Gameweek 37, but I am considering Foden, even Heung-min Son, but I think his form does put me off a little bit. And if I wanted to go very maverick and rogue, I think Elise could be the one. A mega differential who averages 6.6 points per game, and especially at home, he gets so many double-digit returns and maximum bonus points on many occasions. So I think Elise could be a fantastic differential, and he might be very template by the time we get to Gameweek 38. I'm sure he's going to be discussed to death by so many people, but maybe one way of differentiating yourself from those that buy him is to put the armband on the Crystal Palace winger. And I have to say, the form he's in, I wouldn't actually go against that whatsoever. And I think it could really work out for those that go there. But Haaland as my captain, Palmer as the vice is the current play. I am open to changing that. My defensive line, I think, will be quite locked in. It's just a midfielder. Who do I sell? Who do I bring in? That's what it comes down to. And I'm even open to starting 5 midfielders and benching either Jackson or Isak. I think with this bench boost kind of squad that was really optimized for Gameweek 37, it's done very well in the last couple of weeks, but it does leave you with some benching headaches, and it's going to be the same thing once again in Gameweek 38, and that's one of the perks and downsides of wildcarding so late and also having a 50-man squad that's optimized for that chip in the bench boost. But there we go. That is my current plans. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I'm now going to head over to Drafthound and see what they're suggesting. There's a link in the description below for that website. I'd highly recommend you consider becoming a pro pay-to member going into next season. And after that, as the usual stuff, I'll use fpl.team, which is a great FPL resource, and show you an alternative transfer in the midfield instead of Elise. In recent team selections, I discussed selling Bruno Fernandes to Havertz in Gameweek 38, and I could still do that. That's the top suggestion by Drafthound, and second is Gordon to Elise. So Drafthound and I are on board, buying either Havertz or Elise at the top of their priorities, and also selling either Bruno Fernandes or Gordon to make it happen. Their third transfer suggestion is Isak to Gakpo, and I don't think that's actually that bad. Gakpo's been in great form, and I've been talking about him in recent videos and podcasts. So if you want to go for Salah, I think Trent and Gakpo would be the second and third best options for the Liverpool players. Then you've got the likes of Luis Diaz, but I have to say, with the form Gakpo's in, I'd rank him above the Colombian and also all the other attackers, with the exception, of course, of Mohamed Salah. And if we look at the optimization tool, they're recommending Palmer as the vice-captain and Bruno Fernandes to start over Anthony Gordon, but they also recommend selling Bruno Fernandes to Kai Havertz, who is really high up in the player ranking, 7.2 predicted points for Gameweek 38. And if we look at the top 10, we've got Haaland, Salah, Palmer, Son, Foden, Gvardiol, Odegaard, De Bruyne, Havertz and Saka. So a lot of Arsenal players in that top 10, and of course in the top 6 we've got 3 Manchester City players as well in Haaland, Foden and Gvardiol, who are all in my team. A few injured outside De Bruyne and Saka. Those yellow flags do put them a little bit lower in the pecking order, and if we get positive updates about them, they will rise up the ranks in terms of predicted points, and this website is updated regularly to take that into account. Injury updates and also form, all of that is collated to give you a very good idea of the best transfer to make, who to start, and also who to make as your captain. So be sure to check out the link for Drafthound in the description below. Many of you are signing up using my link and talking about how useful this website is. But now, a free resource in fpl.team going into next season. If you haven't used it already, use this website for future planning. I will try not to overcomplicate a simple situation here. So I'm probably going to focus my transfers on the midfield, and like I mentioned earlier, it's probably Elise or Havertz as the top 2 options for me, and then a few outsiders like Eze also enter the equation. But Petrovic in goal, I don't see myself making a goalkeeper transfer. David Raya was potentially going to be one of them, but the way I went about Game Week 37 buying Gavardio in, that also removed the possibility of 2 free transfers in Game Week 38, and I don't think it's worth spending my one and only transfer on a goalkeeper here. The defensive line will remain untouched. Gavardio, Borro and Gabriel, and then Palmer, Son, Foden, and potentially Havertz coming in, who is really backed by the algorithms in FPL.team and Drafthound, and the same front three. The captaincy could also switch about. That's one thing that isn't locked in for my final team that you'll see during the deadline stream. And then Gordon or Bruno Fernandes, it doesn't really matter who I sell, to be fair, because ultimately it doesn't make much difference in terms of who I can afford. Even by selling Bruno Fernandes, I can't buy Saka, who is another one that would definitely enter my thinking. But if you look at the form in 2024, I think Havertz has been more impressive, especially in FPL terms, and I think Havertz over Saka is definitely a good option. It also is a much low owned player, and that also plays a part for those that want to really gain rank and push into the top 100k, top 10k, no matter what your objective is. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you prefer Havertz or Elise as a final Game Week 38 transfer? And would you sell Gordon or Bruno Fernandes? These are some key decisions that a lot of us will have to make for the final game week of the season. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast, and for all your support throughout the season. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. If you want to see Euro Fantasy Football content during the summer, then let's get this to over 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 25,000 subscribers and beyond. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon, the Championships Discord server, FPL League, FPL Challenge, Drafthound, as well as Spotify and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to supporting my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 38 and also for other fantasy formats like UCL Fantasy and Euro Fantasy Football. And I'll see you next time.